There's a lot more opportunity than people expect, and it's about finding a series of businesses or a business that you can just go deep in. If you move vertically or build workflows or automations vertically in a business, there are so many problems that are worth solving. My typical workflow is I'll go from business problem or operations, and I'll kind of dictate what the process looks like. So I'll take that dictation and I'll make what's called like a Mermaid diagram. So it's like a mental model workflow of what that workflow might look like theoretically from a business standpoint. What are all the different steps? Once I know the steps, what are the different services and tools that we could plug in at each one of these steps? And by the time I'm done, I have a pretty clear vision of where I want to go. In the next 12 months, I would say coding will go from 80% to maybe 85 to 90% of the way there. I still don't think it hits that 100% if we're just using language models. You don't have to learn how to code anymore, but it's very helpful to be familiar with what code means, along with understanding basic design principles, as well as very basic software engineering principles. Like, okay, if I have an app that's a SaaS app and we collect payments, we should probably have a table for everyone that's a user. We should also probably have a table for everyone that's paid. We should probably have a way that we link both. And a little bit of all of these will level you up, especially as you go through in the build process, and you'll be less likely to give up if you have some form of thread that you can pull on when things don't go right. n8n might look daunting to start off, but just like anything, over time you'll get better, and everything's a series of steps. You would be surprised what you can accomplish in a pretty short amount of time if you give some focus and love onto building.
All right, welcome to the next episode of the n8n podcast. I have Mark Kashef here. He is what's known as the mad scientist, the guy who originally created this prompt to n8n workflow that you might have seen all over YouTube, taking prompts and flows from, say, Claude and turning those into workflows. And so he's been able to do something that a lot of other content creators have been able to do, but be able to make these content to workflow executions. So I wanted to have him on the show to talk about him, his process, and what he's seen evolving in this n8n space. So Mark, it's awesome to have you on the show, brother.
It's an honor and a privilege, Dylan. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, bro. Now I'd love to kick this off. So can you talk to me just a little bit about your journey with n8n and what led up to this whole prompt to workflow execution that you've built?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a make guy for a long time. And around the boom of n8n last year with the big agent node that kind of changed everything, started taking more of a look at it. And as I saw some things that were a lot easier, let's say custom code in n8n versus make.com, very basic little quality of life things looked a lot better on the n8n side of things versus the world that I was used to. So I started dipping my toes. And as I was dipping my toes, obviously new world, new environment, new structure of nodes. So I was just looking at it, and I have a background in development, and I saw that everything was open source and that n8n was on GitHub. And I'm like, okay, it's open source, it's on GitHub. Theoretically, this is all JSON at the end of the day. What if I could try to have a language model make the JSON and I could find a way to just like paste it? Is that even possible? Or import it? And then after like 12, 15, 30 hours with ChatGPT at the time, before I even started with Claude, I made some progress. I would have like some semi-broken workflows, but I'm like, there's something here. So I went from ChatGPT plus deep research to eventually Claude 3.7 to eventually now Claude 4 with MCP servers. And over that whole journey, it was just a cheat code to just going from like a thought to a draft. That draft might not be the thing I end up with, but it also educated me really quick to cheat time to be like, okay, cool. In make.com, this is how you do it, but in n8n, this is the equivalent. And then I started building workflows that would take a make.com workflow and convert it into a JSON for n8n. So I could kind of transition over my world fully to n8n. So I became a bit of a master in the n8n JSON, which allowed me to move a lot faster. And now that like I've put together this trick and this workflow, I'm able to crank out tons of ideation or even go back and forth with clients or community members and just think of what a workflow might look like a lot quicker. So that was really the emergence of that idea.
Love it. And, you know, so much of this automation there's a little bit of a barrier sometimes getting up and rolling with n8n, right? There's some technical hurdles. You have to have a little bit more coding knowledge than some of these automation platforms. And so when you're doing this, I mean, part of it is overcoming that barrier. And then part of this thing is ideation. Are you like did you just come up with just general ideas, or like how do you source the ideation of like what workflows to build for this text to workflow action?
My typical workflow is I'll go from business problem or operations, and I'll kind of dictate what the process looks like. So I'll take that dictation and I'll make what's called like a Mermaid diagram. So it's like a mental model workflow of what that workflow might look like theoretically from a business standpoint. What are all the different steps? Once I know the steps, I can now start to plug in, okay, what are the different services and tools that we could plug in at each one of these steps? Where do we need custom code, and where can we offload to a language model? Where might it make sense, if it makes sense, to use an AI agent? Because I like to be more deterministic than just kind of like have the chance of hallucination all over the place. So I go through that exercise, and by the time I'm done, I have a pretty clear vision of where I want to go. And now that I know where I want to go, I can take that Mermaid diagram, I can actually feed it as an input to Claude and basically say, take this, here are the tools we want to do, give me a draft of what this might look like in n8n. And that really allows me to do the ideation and brainstorming, visualize it before I actually go into n8n. So now, even when I'm like doing the plumbing and the hard work after you've even generated the workflow, I have a goal in mind that I do have a North Star in mind as well.
And you talked about using Claude. Did you experiment with other like LLMs, or is it the best one? Like, why did you end up landing with Claude?
I tried everything. I tried Gemini. I tried ChatGPT multiple times. I would say Claude has been the most consistent and also the one that needed the least input to get going. If you give Claude just a few little inputs, or in this case, now we have MCP servers to help us out, it is more than enough to get you something that's pretty coherent with a very low hallucination rate in terms of broken nodes. With ChatGPT, it's always almost consistently outputting broken nodes, even if you feed it certain workflows as an example. Now it's a lot better with some of these more advanced models like o4, but in general, Claude, even with like the lower level models, has done the best and the most consistent.
And so it sounds like your process is kind of, okay, what's the business use case? What are all the tools that are needed for the business use case? What are the nodes that I actually have access to that we can use versus custom code nodes that are inside of n8n that we need to outsource? And then you take that overall concept and diagram in Mermaid and say, this is the format, and then bring this across. Did I understand those steps correctly?
Yeah, up until now, those have been the steps. The one nuance lately is like a video came out with a few weeks ago, is using MCP server that has live access to n8n documentation. Because typically the hardest part is, let's say you guys drop a Perplexity node after ages, a native one, right? And it remembers that you only used HTTP before. The tricky part was like educating it that this thing exists. So I would have to go pull on Perplexity, download the JSON, feed that as an example to say, hey, this is what the Perplexity thing looks like, use that. But now with MCP servers and all these little open source tools that are coming out, it's easier to have that live connection to your documentation to make that connection happen.
That was going to be my next question, because I know there's so much documentation that AI scrapes the internet and just doesn't know that this is n8n from 2020, right? It doesn't. And so I've played a little bit around with it, and I was curious about that. So you plug it into an MCP server that has access to the live documentation. Where is that? Is that available on GitHub, or where is that?
Yeah, it's on GitHub. That's called n8n-mcp. It's by this individual named Romuald. Last name will be rough for me to pronounce, but it has like 3.7K stars. And basically what he's allowed you to do is search all the nodes, go through the node properties, the operations, go through a series of sample workflows. So everything that I did separately in isolation, he's put together a server that you can do it all in one place. So that makes your life a lot easier.
And one of the cool things about it being open source and all that is the fact that everyone kind of figures out a little of these painful problems. And some person's like, you know what, this is the hill I'm going to tackle, right? This is what this is going to look like. Yeah. I'm going to figure out the MCP, and I'm going to figure out the prompted workflow. And because it's all open source or fair code, I should say, people can then get in and then solve each one of those problems. You stack them together, and now you have these amazing, amazing use cases.
It's beyond that. So just to compare Make and n8n for a second, in Make, if I wanted to have a webhook, I would physically have to have some form of service pinging that data structure so it knows what it looks like. But in n8n, I can also ask Claude, can you make me a dummy mock-up data set that I can use for the webhook? And I can just paste it, pin it, and I can start like retrofitting and practicing what the workflow might look like right away. So just removing as much friction as possible and offloading that to the AI. So I can just focus on the workflow building itself.
Yeah, and that pinning feature is pretty rad. Being able to pin the data and then not use all the operation call and everything else and burn through credits. You just pin the data. That's one of the things that I like to do is as I'm working through a new workflow, whether I'm building it out or I'm using a template online, is you get that original data source, pin, next step, pin, next step. You run that all the way through. And once you get that all the way through, you're like, okay, I know that everything's now connected and hooked up. You hit go and hit run. Is that similar for your process or do you have something different?
No, 100%. I pin and I don't repin until I figured out the workflow, or I figured out the flow, or I figured out all the nuts and bolts of the problem nodes or the code nodes. Because once that's figured out, life is good. You might get different data formats over time. You can adjust on the fly, but that's the hardest part. Is just going from 0 to 1, error-free and no bugs.
Love it. When you talk about these code nodes, like when you figure out, okay, this is something that n8n can't do, so we need to do a code node. What's your process for making that code node? Do you copy into a certain LLM? Do you take the whole JSON, dump it in? What does that look like?
Yeah, it really depends on the use case. So on the code node, if I feel like I'm about to have 7 to 10 nodes that are kind of superfluous to writing code, because I write Python by background and JavaScript. So when I look at how many nodes it's going to take me to do the thing that I know in my head is like 15 to 20 lines of code, that's where I know, okay, we're going to a custom code node. And obviously there's some limitations. I don't think you can make an HTTP request from a custom code node yet in n8n. So there's some limitations there. So depending on exactly what I'm trying to do, I will usually, if I'm building the workflow, a draft in Claude, it knows the context of what I'm trying to accomplish. So I'll have it draft out the code, I'll run it, I'll debug as needed and go through that feedback loop until I'm where I'm at. And in some cases, this is more advanced, so I'm going to give a disclaimer there. I will use a Lambda from AWS because there is an invoke a function Lambda in n8n. And that is a game changer because you can summarize 20 nodes into one big mega script that you invoke. But that's, again, very advanced, and there's very certain use cases that I use that.
Yeah, the code macro. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Love it. Okay. Fantastic. Now let's talk a little bit about these use cases, right? I think a lot of these people, we see these things happen and we're like, okay, great. I know I can do prompt to workflow, but what is like, maybe give me like a top 3 favorite workflows that you've been able to build using this kind of prompt to workflow action?
Yeah, one of my favorite ones is this workflow where it tracks all the new models coming out from OpenRouter, which is basically a model aggregator for open source and closed source models, and it has an API that lets you list all the recent models. So I have an automation that will go through, look for the latest model, filter out anything that's not on my existing Google Sheet, and then it will run all the prompts that I care about through these brand new models. And then it will have a separate tab that acts as a judge to tell me, should I care about this new model that dropped, or does it not change anything for me? That's my all-time favorite workflow for personal use.
That's a great use case because the thing is, there's so many AI tools and LLMs and things like this. I kind of feel like it's like a Niagara Falls of like LLMs and AI, and then you just stick your head out inside of the water, and you're like, oh my God, there's so much here, and like you could spend all your time researching to figure out what's the best thing. And I think it's one of the benefits of like content creators and people that do this deep research is you go and you figure out like, okay, what's hype and what's helpful, and you're trying to parse those two things out. And when you figure that out, you're like, I'm back. So I love the fact you made a workflow that allows you to save time without knowing, okay, is this useful? Is this not? Is there any fairly recent LLMs using this methodology? You're like, oh, this one kind of, there's a delta here, and it's actually kind of standing out as an outlier.
I would say it's like the inverse. After running some tests, some OG models, some older models seem to do the thing better than some of the newer models. So I noticed that for one specific test, OpenAI 4.0 Mini, which is a pretty old model now, did the best on one particular task where I would have never imagined it. I would have indexed on 4.1 or 4.0 or anything that's on the newer side. So this kind of workflow more humbles me because we always assume that newer is better. And I've personally like consulted for and worked with CTOs that are still using 3.5 turbo for some of their production grade systems. So newer is not better. Newer comes with new tests, new hallucinations, new edge cases. So that's like the biggest education point I've gotten from that workflow.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is because a lot of stuff is new and we want the latest, greatest, most experimental things. And at the same point, we want it to be reliable, production ready, able to go out to the masses. And so it's really hard to find that nexus point between experimental, exciting, new, reliable, stable, and predictable. And I don't know, is this your automation? Is that the thing that serves as the function for you to determine what works there?
No, that's a great question. I have a whole like mental model around using models and for what. So different providers will use for different use cases. But if we were in a production environment, let's say what we consult our clients on is, unless the cost for running your operation or this workflow goes down precipitously and maintains the same level of accuracy and quality, is it worth us even having a conversation? If it's just really good, or it's really good at reasoning, that sounds like it's really expensive to run if it's really good at reasoning, because the most cutting edge models will always be the most expensive and the most unpredictable. So when the latest, I think, o3 Pro came out on the Pro ChatGPT account, I tested it out on some very normal prompts I ran everywhere. And all of a sudden I got policy errors where I was saying I was going against their policies for running a very simple, innocent prompt. And you can see the balloons there. Regardless of that, it's just, when you look at the actual workflows, you'll notice that Claude does well on copy, but to use Claude at scale sometimes can be expensive. OpenAI is a good soldier. It does what it's told. It doesn't do it with a great level of enthusiasm. It just does it. And then Gemini is very dry. So I'll use Gemini as my workhorse because it has a million context window as of the recording. So it's cheaper. It has a large context window. It's good at going through a bunch of data, picking out some needles in the haystack. So it's really like the right soldier for the right job.
Yeah. And if you know what they are, you can almost label them and know that this is my workhorse, right? This is versus, yep. Okay, wonderful. And in terms of like, not only like the building out these workflows and these processes, what are your thoughts around making these production ready? Actually something that is beyond just innovative and cool, but like, is there any ones that you've seen actually go beyond just exciting and experimental that you've been able to roll this out into some sort of production grade environment?
Yeah, of course. So we have built my agency production grade and workflows in practice. And obviously the biggest thing you want to ask is, what does production grade mean? What's volume look like? What does concurrent requests look like? So a lot of the engineering comes in understanding how to queue up certain requests, especially at scale, if you have hundreds, if not thousands of different requests happening at once. And it just takes a lot of testing. And before the evaluation node and framework from n8n, which is now like native in the platform, we've had to build externally a way to evaluate the workflow, make sure that we had redundancies. So before we had our own process, and now we're starting to dip our toes into leveraging what you've released, which is that framework for evaluation. All those different nodes, looking for metrics, looking for consistency, and you basically have an LLM as a judge as a part of those nodes as well. So we're looking to migrate to those because the more we have n8n native, the better.
Yeah, I've used the AI evaluation. It's a really cool new feature, and it's funny because I went to like there was an AI engineering conference in San Francisco, and I went there, and there's all these companies with their own AI evaluation software platform things. And I was like, oh, n8n kind of has it already natively built in. And it's funny because there's these companies that you got to figure out what product you're going to build. And then as you build out these products, if a company like OpenAI or n8n or somebody else all of a sudden goes, oh, that's a problem we'll solve. It kind of, there's a thousand like sad sounds that happen like all across. Like there's 1,000 AI companies go down at night. What do you see as like the opportunities in this space for if somebody was looking at problems that are painful enough to solve, but not something that these big guys, these big people will take on?
Thing is, small to medium business problems are typically not addressed in full by any of the big competitors because they're never going to optimize for how this individual marketing agency or how this individual law firm runs its operations, or which systems it uses, or custom coded CRMs for certain companies. So I would just say there's a lot of opportunity, especially for small to medium business, because they're so special that in a way they are special snowflakes. Each one has its own operation, its own suite of tools, its own budgets or budgetary constraints. So I would just say that the entire industry, I just had a call today with someone in Europe that has a marketing agency who was super worried because they felt like they were super behind in this race and they're trying to compete and make sure they survive as a marketing agency. And the thing is, there's so many pockets where people have not even started to implement this stuff. We might live in this bubble where I typically tend to assume that everyone is on the same page as me in terms of where I see things going, how things look, what I use day to day. The average person is literally just still learning ChatGPT or the basics of ChatGPT. So I would just say like there's a lot more opportunity than people expect. And it's about finding a series of businesses or a business that you can just go deep in. You'll realize that if you move vertically or build workflows or automations vertically in a business, there are so many problems that are worth solving. And it's like a very deep problem. There's a data problem, there's a workflow problem, and you'll notice it's much meatier than just a workflow. It's a mindset, it's a process, it's upskilling employees. So there's just so much opportunity in moving to the world where everyone wants to be AI native and AI first.
Yeah, it's not just from like build me a workflow. It's more of like a systems backend operational overhaul of your technology stack. And so moving from fax machines and WordPress, right, to going into this future focus, maybe it's a Webflow into Airtable instead of a Google Sheets or whatnot. It's just okay. Let's do an overhaul on your technology stack so that everything runs smoother and better. It's not just one workflow that solves a problem. Maybe the workflow will get you in the door as an agency. And trying to figure out what is that lane you want to be in. I want to serve marketing agencies, or I want to serve designers, or I want to serve, aerospace engineers, or whatever it might be. Just figure out what do you have some sort of unique domain knowledge in that can make you stand out so that you understand their painful problems, and you combine that with n8n to actually have a competitive advantage in this world of aggressively upgrading your tech stack.
Yeah, one of the most popular n8n workflows in my community right now is this AI audit workflow, where pretty much someone fills out a form that you can vibe code on something like a Lovable or a Bolt or Replit, and then that whole payload of all that information in the wizard gets sent to n8n via webhook, and it goes through a series of steps to fully audit your business and where you have pockets where you can fit n8n, other platforms, other technologies, and have a full report as like a lead magnet, but like a legendary lead magnet.
I love that, legendary lead magnet. And I was actually thinking the same thing, because again, how do you provide immense value to a company that then allows you to be able to say, oh great, I've just revealed all these problems. Would you like that? Would you like help with that? And would you like me to help you with that? And that's a cool, we'll call it legendary lead magnet, to be able to provide value for the systems. And so it sounds like one of the things it's doing is it audits the business based on the problems that they're coming across. Are you looking to do a Lovable or some sort of vibe coded version of that to then go from that into some sort of n8n workflow too?
That's exactly what's happening right now. So the app lives on, like, let's say Lovable, and then it sends that webhook directly to an n8n workflow that's listening in for that payload. And then they just work in tandem, symbiosis. And by the end of it, the user gets an email with a beautiful, HTML, with a PDF that goes through their business, every area where it's been assessed, where AI might make the most sense, where they are, how long it would take to implement. And obviously this takes some more tacit knowledge to set up in terms of what they should do. But when you marry this with something like deep research from Perplexity, you can have a really potent combo, because you're looking up the company from the name and the company and the domain, and you're doing research ahead of time, and you're weaving that in. So the report is actually a lot richer than some cookie cutter template.
Yeah, it's this evolution from quizzes for your business. It's actually using AI to evaluate and do deep research. So it's more so than you're going down one of three buckets for a business use case.
Yes,
and being actually more generative problem solving answers. I want to dial back to something that you were talking about earlier, because it's top of my mind right now. When we talked about LLMs, one of the new ones that just recently came out, and maybe by the time this podcast comes out, there's 1,000 other ones. Grok 4. I've heard good things about it. I don't know if it really is. Have you run it through that system? Is Grok good for it, or is it not great?
I'm biased. So for me, we've never had a production scale app for a client using Grok. And the reason why is I find the personality of Grok more on the rebellious side or contrarian side. I like predictability. I like boring. I like to know what I'm going to get. So Grok I use all the time when I vibe code, or I don't know what the word is today, context engineer. So I'll use Grok to brainstorm because I can then harness its rebellious, contrarian, smart nature to come up with a beautiful product plan or a build or architecture plan. But then I'll execute with Claude or I'll execute with OpenAI. So although it got some views, it's a really good model. One, we're going to forget about it in a month when GPT-5 or Claude 5 or whatever comes out anyway. It's kind of like the flavor of the month. But I would say like Grok in production environments, I haven't seen.
I do want to, when you talked about this one thing, and it's nuances, and we probably both know what it is, but I think it's really good to explain it, right? The difference between vibe coding and context engineering, right? I'm going to say it, and I want you to add to it, is the vibe coding is really a lot around just, one prompt, yes, accept all, please make me something magic, versus context engineering, from my understanding, is around being able to feed in all of the requirements around something and then giving it the context needed in order to engineer something. Could you add to it, what you're seeing, the difference between the two and where this might be evolving into?
Yeah, I'm a bit, to be honest, a bit contrarian on this whole context engineering thing because I think that vibe coding is a spectrum. On the left hand of the spectrum is exactly what you just mentioned. Build me Shopify with one prompt. And then why is this not working? Okay, vibe coding sucks. And then you have the middle where you're kind of leveraging, you're kind of planning out in your prompt what you want to build. You're trying to be thoughtful about the stack and how it's designed, but you're still offloading a lot to the AI. And then context engineering to me is the complete end of the spectrum of vibe coding, where you're still going to rely on the AI to be your workhorse and build, but you're taking the onus of like kind of being a pseudo product manager or a technical product manager to come up with the build specs, what infrastructure it should use, the language models, the rules that you should use in something like a Cursor or Windsurf. So for me, it's on the end of a spectrum of vibe coding versus its own new world.
And there's something to that as well. I feel like when generative AI came out, original ChatGPT or any of that stuff, it basically was a 10x multiplier. So if you're like a 1x coder, it could make you a 10x coder, supposedly, right? But if you're also like a 1x marketer, it can make you a 10x marketer. So if you had no skills and you said, write me a book, you're going to do okay. But if you're, I don't know, some high level author, you can get so much more out of it because you have the depth of knowledge in order to understand how to properly educate, kind of like a good, someone that knows how to cook in their own kitchen and can tell you how to make good food versus, you never own in a restaurant and just saying, make me a gourmet dish. You don't really understand the difference. So my question with that is, while AI is awesome, while n8n is awesome, and why these things are awesome, it does do more. What are some of the things that people should be focusing on leveling up in terms of skill sets? Like, what do they need to focus on to truly get more of this than the average bear?
No, that's an amazing question. And it's one that I receive on an almost daily basis. So obviously it depends what your goal is, what you're trying to build. If you are trying to build or whether you're just trying to consult on what someone else should build. But I'm going to assume that you want to build. If you want to build, you don't have to learn how to code anymore. But it's very helpful to be familiar with what code means. So doing a course to be aware of what JavaScript is, what an HTTP request is, what JSON is, what Python, at least at a high level, very high level, is doing, or what these functions mean, will just help you understand when things inevitably go wrong. And I don't see a future for a while where coding is perfect. The reason why coding is 80% of the way there with Gen AI is Gen AI relies on the fact that it has training data on old things it's seen in the past that kind of meshes together. It's hard to do something that's cutting edge or brand new because it's literally never seen it before. So it will hallucinate its way, and then you're going to have to take over to go from 80% to 100. Now, will this get better? Yes. But being aware of code, being aware of JavaScript and everything I mentioned, along with understanding basic design principles, as well as very basic software engineering principles, like, okay, if I have an app that's a SaaS app and we collect payments, we should probably have a table for everyone that's a user. We should also probably have a table for everyone that's paid. We should probably have a way that we link both. So it's kind of like very bare bones understandings of infrastructure. And a little bit of all of these will level you up, especially as you go through in the build process. You will learn against your will what an HTTP request is or why JSON's failing, because you'll get errors and you'll spin and spin. And the deeper you go down the rabbit hole, the more you'll learn. But it will be less daunting and you'll be less likely to give up if you have some form of thread that you can pull on when things don't go right.
Yeah, so there's a fundamental knowledge of, do I understand the fundamentals of code, right? Do I understand, what an expression is? Do I understand what JSON is? Do I understand, what a variable is or tokens? And then, okay, cool. That's the bare bones. And so if something goes wrong, you can dive into it. So like, I remember one time I was being lazy and I was trying to solve this thing for a previous client. And I was like, oh my God, I was just trying to get the AI to solve this problem for me. And I was trying to get this widget in this box for a chat module or whatever. And then it couldn't get the answer. And I must have spent 2 hours of just going back and it would not produce it. I tried to vibe code it, wouldn't give me the answers. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna look at the documentation. And I went and I read the documentation. I was like, oh, click, boom, just solved it. And so sometimes it takes so much more effort to sometimes be inherently lazy than you can say, you know what? I'm gonna figure this thing out right. I'm gonna map out exactly what you need. And that's why I think it's really cool, this legendary lead magnet you can have to kind of get all of those details in place and then map the terrain. So as you build through the process, it makes the last 10% of the journey. It's easy to go from 0 to 80, but it makes that last 10% so much smoother. And you don't need to go and try to rebuild the system, or you don't get stuck in some sort of maze of vibe coding where you get locked away.
Yeah, there's this meme that says, change this color, vibe coding, 100,000 lines changed, human, 1 line changed of code. And the real impact of that. And then that's where you get super spaghetti code, where you rely so much on the AI to write the code. You have no way to see what's happening. It's kind of like being a manager of an employee who can literally tell you whatever you want in terms of like what they're doing. And you just take their word for it because you have no way to audit their progress. So you're like, okay, you said you're done. I guess it's done. So that's one part. And another thing is you'll notice that as you build, there's some things that we take for granted that we know now that the average person doesn't. So if you say to any vibe coding app, choose the one you want, go implement the latest model from OpenAI. It's going to use GPT-4 from 2.5 years ago because that's the last time it got trained. Unless you're intentional about telling it, I want this model and here's documentation for this model or here's how to refer to it, it won't know. And these are only trials and tribulations that you can learn from after you're tested by fire. So it's really about building, immersing yourself, using your research tools, not being afraid to get your hands dirty and learn what you need to debug everything.
Yeah, and there's these, I'd say, common mistakes, and I'd love to get your insights on this. There's common patterns of mistakes that some people make when they get started, is they see these super complex workflows on n8n, and they can get incredibly complex. And then they try to get in there and like, oh, this looks amazing. I just download this workflow, get started. And then they get stuck and they're like, what do I do? And they can't make progress. So like you get this bump, like a sugar rush of like, look at all this stuff. And it feels good, but then you get stuck and you get disheartened and you don't know what to do next. When you have a community, right? And you have people going through your community. What are some of the fundamental things that you've seen, patterns of behavior when people are just getting started with n8n that help them be successful in the long run?
There's the self-serve and there's the help option. Obviously, I offer the help option in the community. We have coaches, we have me. On the self-serve though, step one is if it's pretty straightforward, screenshot the error and throw it into a language model like Claude or ChatGPT, enable it to go read the latest documentation from n8n and have it be your co-pilot to like debug what's happening. That's like tier one. Tier two, this is like my secret sauce, is I'll actually tell them, record a loom of you walking through your entire workflow and double click on the area that's not working, stop the loom, download it, upload it to Google AI Studio because it accepts videos input, and have it watch the video and help you troubleshoot what's happening and how you can go about it, and maybe do deep research on how you can fix it. Doing that fixes usually 70% of their problems. The 30% might need some more hands-on love for myself and my team.
That's great. That is actually so good because you're giving more context to it. And for me, like, one of my love languages is Loom. Like the way that I like to communicate with people is like, hey, let me show you everything that's going on in my world, especially if you're trying to communicate something complex or whatever. So you're just giving more context. And then when you can you're just giving more parameters. So I love that. So the AI Studio, right? Google AI Studio,
Yeah.
Loom download video, upload video, and say, hey, please help.
SOS.
Yeah. Please, somebody.
Yeah.
That's great. And then in terms of, people going into the space and leveling up, where do you see are the opportunities when people are coming into this and they're starting to get real traction, whether they're trying to grow an AI automation agency or they're trying to get a job as a developer, or you're a business, trying to leverage this stuff, what do you see as the real opportunities in the space right now for these types of people?
I'd say like there's so many words and terms and buzzwords. I would just say like being a well-educated implementation partner is a huge valley that's like yet to be fully tapped. There's just so many businesses, enterprise, small, medium, whatever, startup, that want someone to lead them through this darkness. Because if you're looking on the outside and you just hear these words like n8n and make, it just sounds like weird Pokemon characters. They don't, you have no idea what this even means. They don't know where things are heading. They don't even have a baseline. At least like I have a baseline for what 3.5 turbo was 3 years ago to appreciate what O3 is now. But when you say the word O versus 4, there's all these different nuances that are so obvious to us because we're addicted to staying up to date that people are just like 2-3 years behind. They have no idea. They don't know that you could technically use something like a ChatGPT or Claude, an n8n, to do the power of like 4 or 5 people in one shot. So being an implementation partner, being an educator, being the one that leads people, the one that can see, leading the blind, basically, that's like one of the best positions you can put yourself in right now.
Yeah. It reminds me almost like, with the United States is this trailblazing, some people, landed in Plymouth Rock and they're like, we're cool. This is where we're going to go. And other people made it to Texas. Great. And other people trailblaze all the way to California. So you're just farther along in the path and you're like, okay, I've seen all those spots, but you don't know how sunny California is, man. It's good over here. I've got some things, maybe avoid, Death Valley, go to some other places. And I like that as almost being the guide for people and saying, this is the latest and greatest. Leave this alone. And also, when you're building things out too, maybe not build this technology stack. Maybe we wait a little bit for what's on the horizon. And what I'm curious about on your side is, because you're so deep in the space and you're also working with this, even at the cutting edge of what we have with technology stacks, what's on the horizon? What's next do you see coming up in the next, 6 months, 3 years out? What's on the horizon?
That's a tough question to do 3 years out. So for me, like my rule of thumb is I only look 3 months ahead now because it's hard to anticipate step changes that are coming. But in the next 12 months, I would say coding will go from 80% to maybe 85 to 90% of the way there. I still don't think it hits that 100% if we're just using language models because of what I mentioned before. So coding will be not solved, but like very close to being fully solved. We're going to have a little bit of a AI slop pandemic across all multimedia. We're going to have generated VAO for perfect quality. We're going to have AI YouTubers that are eating my business. We're going to have all kinds of things that are going to make us question our eyes a lot more. That's more of a macro idea that I had. On the workflow side, I would only imagine that n8n and the other competitors, you're going to be able to go into there and do the entire experience by just interfacing with a copilot, build the workflow, test the workflow, evaluate the workflow, push it to production with the help of a copilot assistant, and you'll be able to get that help in the platforms themselves. So the ability to self-serve is going to increase a lot. In terms of just like general trends, I would say like we're going to move from thousands of AI startups and we're going to contract into a series of super apps, and super apps that are finally focusing on profitability, not just training the best AI model to get to quote unquote AGI. Because the reason why, for example, Gemini runs so many queries for free or close to free that are very expensive on their end is everyone's willing to bleed cash right now to be in a position to be one of the few competitors in this AI monopoly. Once that happens, inference costs will change quite a bit. They'll be very expensive eventually, probably, to run certain types of inference for certain use cases. At the same time, we're probably going to have open source models that are also very potent. We'll finally get maybe an O1 or an O3 level open source model in the not so distant future, which is awesome for folks that might not have the disposable income or don't have access to that same type of cash flow to run an AI business on a lean budget, right? Especially on the security side. So I just see a lot of that happening. And one major thing that I'm worried about is more so the cybersecurity aspect. There's going to be cybersecurity issues across the board for every use case, for every domain. So that's one thing, especially as voice agents become indistinguishable, as HeyGen or things like HeyGen become 100% accurate. It's going to be a tricky environment. But a good thing is you'll have many parties of one being able to build a company of their own or build 7 to 10 n8n workflows within a week because they can move faster and upskill themselves really quickly as well.
Yeah, and this is a combination of whenever this new opportunity comes, right? And I've seen this because, decades ago I used to run a food truck business, right? And then there's this all of a sudden it was a time of my life. But the point being is, some master chef came out, made an awesome food truck, and then other people say, "Ooh, I can open a food truck." But the thing is, you can't tell the difference between a Michelin star chef and like someone who just randomly opened a food business with no experience whatsoever. And what happens is you can't look at the difference. They just all look the same, right? The AI agencies or companies, they all just look the same. And so you get this AI slop pandemic rolling out there, and then people get disenfranchised and disillusioned. But then the good stuff sticks, right? The good companies stick. If you have good integrity, you've got good ethics, you're hardworking, you're following up, you're staying at the cutting edge, you're being consultative, you're able to deliver value consistently, right? You actually care about your customer and you're consulting them, and you become an ally on that front versus, shiny clickbaity type of stuff. That the good companies will stick through this. So I think you're right. And then this evolution of, easy marketing versus the best marketing, right? Or you have this, make a workflow, but do you have a cyber secured, 100% reliable workflow that is impenetrable, right? And so the question is how do you find that competitive advantage, and how do you take what is just known in business of relationship building, like good relationships, being a good person, and then combine that to offering massive value with AI? And I really agree that there is going to be a drop off of people trying this new fad ways, and then they're going to go into crypto 2.0 and NFT 2.0 and just all those other things. But the companies that just really latch onto this thing, I think are going to stick.
I agree. And I have no qualms shouting you guys out, because one of the reasons you're having the growth that you're experiencing is you're community obsessed. And I don't think enough companies and startups are community obsessed. And it shows up every day. Like today, I was on a community call and we noticed that n8n dropped the ability to have a fallback model. So if OpenAI goes out, I can now default to some open source model. Very small qualities of life that I'm like, man, it will take insert name of competitor 2 years to care about this micro problem that's probably affecting thousands of users. And I think the future is companies that are obsessed about their communities and literally just listening and taking a pulse for what they want.
The question is like, because one of the big questions that people have, right, is in this world of AI generative technology, how do I keep authentic, right? How do I use automation and AI to actually build a bridge of connection and trust and authenticity and care? And, one of the models in n8n is like really deeply care about your community, offer massive value. The reason why we do have a product that's available and downloadable is that we're more hyper-focused on how do we build a product that people love, right? And then automate the things that people hate, right? Like if you're like, okay, what's the thing you don't like in your business the most? Okay, taxes. Can we find a way that someone can do taxes for us? Can we have an AI do that, right? What do you want to do? I mean, deep connections and conversations. So that's a great question on like, how do you solve that, right? And how do you be customer obsessed and show that you deeply care while automating out the processes that waste time and kill bandwidth?
It's also about giving you what you need, not what you want. So I'm sure there's a lot of features that people want in n8n, but taking that one small fallback example, you need that feature, because if you want to go into production environment and OpenAI fails, your client's not going to be mad at OpenAI. They're going to be mad at you. So that is something you need. And I think it's really important to be focused on the need versus want, because people will want the world and will keep wanting till the cows, well, I don't know what the term is. I think cows come home,
Yeah, I think
but
so.
I think so. Yeah. But being obsessed about the things that matter first is going to be really important.
I think there's levels of, I think with any business, right, or any product or any company, there's tiers of this. Like when you first start out, there's kind of this like, tell me what you want and I'll build it, right? That's like level one, right? And
Yes.
it's like, yeah, what do you want? I'll make anything that you want. Then level two is like, well, here's my Chipotle menu items of things that you can have. I've got these workflows and I can bolt on widgets to these things. So which one of these menus you can have? And then there's like that Gordon Ramsay where they're like, I'm not going to tell you what you want. I trust that, I'm not going to say, Gordon, here's what I want. I'm like, Gordon, chef's recommendation. Tell me what you got for me on my table. And I think when you demonstrate that much mastery in a space, and then people will outsource that trust to you, especially with integrity, with care, with proven mastery. And I think that's what you're talking about, is like, how do you get to that so much customer obsessed that their problem, their needs more than that? It's like
Yes.
with kids, like I just recently had a son, and it's like, he may want Snickers bars and YouTube for 47 hours a day. Yeah, I know this is what you want, but what I'm going to give you is this other stuff that's probably going to serve you a little bit better in the long run. So how can you be customer obsessed with AI technology? I love that, man. It's been super awesome having you on the podcast. So my question for you is this: is there anything else you'd like to let people know about before you tell them how to get a hold of you?
I would say if you haven't started, or you always say some self-talk like, I'm not technical, I don't know what any of this stuff means, whoa, that's way too above my head. I would say this is a really good point in time to start deconstructing those self-beliefs, because I literally I have almost 600 people in my community, many of which are entrepreneurs. They're starting at zero sometimes. And we go from zero to us doing like a little hackathon, and all of a sudden in week 7, we are talking about puppeteer and words that they could not imagine were possible. So I would just say, like, there's so many free resources online. There's an infinite number of YouTube videos you can watch to upskill yourself. And n8n might look daunting to start off. And I'm a developer. And even for me, it took me a little bit of time to get used to things. But just like anything, over time, you'll get better. And you can start building and really, I'm not going to say change your life and make some form of hyperbole, but you can at least change your circumstances. You can change your skill set. And the next 10 to 15 years is like this mindset shift that you're never going to be done learning. You're going to be a lifelong learner, whether you like it or not. We're going to have to keep up with a certain level of what's happening. So take this moment, or at least maybe this call to action, as just like destroying those limiting beliefs. They're not technical, and everything's a series of steps. And you would be surprised what you can accomplish in a pretty short amount of time if you give some focus and love onto building.
Before you tell people to get a hold of you, I want to double click on that. And I know that just from my own being in the space, I have a tendency jumping into industries that I have no understanding about, but just being excited about it. And there's this feeling that I've always had when I step into like a new industry of like, I'm a fraud. You're like, I'm a fraud. I don't know what I'm doing. How do I even do this? Like, what is this new thing? Whether it's like, going into a new industry, a new space, a new technology, and you feel this. And what I've noticed is if you just keep doing those activities, even though you feel like, oh my God, I feel super uncomfortable with this thing, and I don't know, you're going through a tunnel and it's all darkness, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make this through. Then all of a sudden, like one day you just kind of wake up and you're like, oh yeah, I've got this. Like it's like this slow trickle effect that you don't realize that you're adjusting to this uncomfortable waters of this new technology space. And then all of a sudden people start asking you for questions and recommendations. And whether it's on a macro scale, like on like YouTube, or in a micro scale in your own community or at your own company, you start to become the resource, and you start to be that go-to expert in the space. And so it's just like, stay on the path long enough until those fraud, imposter syndrome beliefs slowly silence themselves and they've got nothing left to stand on.
I agree. And it's going to be, it's a beautiful moment when you realize that you can remove those words from your vocabulary of not being technical. And the even better moment is when you can start teaching others, having been someone that's not technical as well. So I would just say, like, it's a feedback loop. It's a each one teach one mentality.
So if people want to find you, how do they find you?
Right on. So I'll give you the list. So on YouTube, you'll find me, Mark Kashef. As Dylan said, I'm a mad scientist, so I'm going to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible as much as possible and educating as much for free as I possibly can. If you're interested in 10xing your learning and you want a one-stop shop for not just automation, but voice agents, prompt engineering, vibe coding, we run a community called Early AI Adopters, which is almost at 600 folks. Happy to see you if you want to jump in there. And other than that, we have our agency, Prompt Advisors, where we do more enterprise builds. But if you're looking for strategy consulting, that's another way you can engage with us as well.
Awesome. Mark, it has been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show, brother. And I will see you on the other side, my friend.
Likewise. Thank you, Dylan.
I take care now. Later.